There we are. We're live. All right, cool. So welcome to the first live video in the shop on the Golf WRX channel. Show you around. We're here. Whiteboard behind. To the clubs, taking around. So gonna answer some questions. And I got some pretty cool ones. Actually got a lot. I got a few off the forums. I got a bunch on Instagram. So I'm gonna go through and do my best to answer them as well, best I possibly can. Now, the first one I have actually There we go. Sorry about that. Sorry about the echo there. So the first one I have is pulling a shaft from an adjustable, like modern driver, and part of it involved if you use like paste or anything like that, because there are different types of tips, right? So this is a Mizuno tip, and there's no ferrule, there's no plastic. This whole thing is aluminum. It's very, very easy to do. There's also like the TaylorMade style, which has the small ferrule at the top. I mean, it blends in really nicely, but it's right there. And really, like, the question is, again, how do you go through the process of pulling these things off? And it's actually, you pull them off just like you would actually pull off any other driver head. And so I'm going to show you. It's really simple. Shaft puller. So let's do it. As always, safety glasses. These are rated for this kind of stuff. So I want to make sure that I'm going through this and also, you know, demonstrating the safe way to process. So what you want to have, and what I like to use when I am pulling irons, wedges, graphite shafts, it doesn't matter, is a micro torch. And the reason I like to use a micro torch is the fact that you can really direct heat. I know a lot of times back in, like, when I first started, a lot of times people would recommend using heat guns. But when you think about the multi materials that are involved in making a modern day driver or ferrule head, even hybrid heads now, to actually direct a lot of heat with a heat gun is going to just continue to blow air all over the place. So to prevent that, or to prevent ruining some of the graphite or putting any extra pressure or any extra strain on the tip. And the reason I say that is because a lot of, like, basically all of these aluminum tips are anodized, and it's put on through a heating process. And if you actually go and try to heat them too much, you're going to break them. You're going to ruin them. You're not going to really necessarily ruin the tip itself. It's still going to function, but you're going to remove that layer. And if you're trying to figure out what loft it is, you're not going to actually be able to do that at all. So I'm going to pull tip. The question was also about if there's any type of paste I recommend, or any type of like thing I use to just preserve finishes, and I don't use anything like that at all, just because through technique you don't really have to worry about that stuff. You used to have to, and it depends on the driver head. Some of them would have paint that was either very fragile, or you'd end up having something like say an FT3, an FT5, those Callaway drivers that had the carbon composite all the way around the back and at the face. So you could use it if you were trying to heat a very, very small portion. But generally speaking, the way to actually reshaft those is to just cut it off, drill it out, and then go from there. But luckily for me, I haven't had to reshaft one of those in a while. So again, show you how this is done. I do this. Shaft is in the puller. I have it pretty much primed up to the very edge. Let me get this over here as best I can. There we go. All right. I've got one of these. It's a little simple shim from GolfWorks, not Golf WRX. And what this does is it makes sure that I have the right size, because if this is too large, and it could collapse the top of the aluminum. You don't want to ruin that. Obviously, you want to keep that as nice as possible. So all I do is I make sure I use the right size, because it comes in 370. It's a little bigger, actually. I think it's like close to 390, and then this is about 340. So for a 335 shaft, it fits on nice and easily. I prime it. Now this is also a spring-loaded shaft puller, so I'm going to kind of create some tension, and that's going to pull the shaft off a lot quicker as well. If you don't have a spring-loaded shaft puller, or you have kind of one of those ones that's more industrial, where you actually use some type of priming mechanism, I know there's a Mitchell one that does that, then, you know, it's basically the same process, except you're not going to prime it. This is primed with the spring, so get it set, You can see there's some tension. I can see the spring inside of here is actually working quite well. Let's fire up the torch. You want to use as little heat as possible. And this is one of the other questions that came in before, and I've had it asked is, how many times can you use a shaft pull? Well, to be honest, if you do it properly, you can use it almost as many times as you want. Within reason. Usually it's about 4 or 5, maybe 6. If you don't use the proper technique and you ruin it, you're never going to get one out of it. You're just going to use it the one time. So, got it started. Boom, there it goes. As you can see, the spring has already started to kick in. It is hot, so I'm not going to just reach for it. That's the spring kicking it off the rest of the way, and we're done. It is still a little warm, but because, again, you don't use a lot of heat, you can allow it to come out really clean. I didn't ruin anything on the top there. You can see that this little sleeve, this little shim here helped protect that top part, and I didn't have to worry about it at all. Last but not least, you can see the tip here. There is some epoxy left. Quick wipe down, and we're essentially good to go. Obviously, I would have to clean it again if I wanted to reuse it. Now, a good sign that a shaft was installed properly is there's not a huge whack load of epoxy in that tip. Clean the outside, it's ready to go. It's easy to install. And that's it. So hopefully you found that helpful. You can always go back and watch it, which I think some people are going to. And we've done videos like this before where I've walked through shaft pulling. With irons, it's essentially the same process, except if you are using, if it's graphite, exact same process. Let's see here. I just want to make sure the chat is up. There we go. I think we're good to go. Okay, and that's basically, again, so getting back to it. If you're doing irons, with irons, what you want to do is basically the exact same thing with graphite shafts. Heat up in a localized position, you wait for it to break, and it goes off. The only difference is the ferrules are a lot longer. And using that shim, what the heat will do is it'll actually push and compress the ferrules up, so you don't have to worry about trying to cut them off, because if it is graphite, then if you try and cut the ferrule off, then unfortunately what's going to happen is you run a huge risk of actually scratching the graphite shaft underneath the ferrule if you are using a knife. Even if you're being very careful, a lot of the finishes can get knocked off there. So all you do is you heat, it's going to push the ferrule up, and then it's going to knock it off, and then you just clean the rest of it off. The melted plastic on top of the iron head or on top of the shaft sleeve isn't a big deal. And from there, it's you clean it out and you install it again. Let's see the other question we got here. Okay. Refinishing. It's not something that I like to do. It's not something that I really focus on. I have done putters in the past. Anything that is just like a solid piece of metal, happy to do it. If it's raw, again, not a huge issue. It's when you get into either chrome plating or some type of other metal plating or just painting in general, I don't really mess around with that stuff. Do paint fill and things like that is not an issue, but let me go, actually, I'm going to go grab a putter really quick, and I'll bring you back kind of an example of something that has been refinished in the past. So this is as deep as I'm ever going to get on refinishing. This is an old Spalding TP Mills putter. Bought it for, I think, maybe $10, maybe $5. I'm not even sure. And it's just a solid piece of carbon steel. CNC milled. You can still kind of see the mill marks on it. It was really bad shape. It was dinged all along the top line, had a lot of dings along here as well. The face wasn't too bad, but the bottom, and you can see the bottom still, it's not perfect by any means. You can still see some of the dents and stuff. But what I did was, use my grinding wheel. I don't have it down here because it creates a ton of dust. So anything like that, I always do outside. I started with a rougher grit and then worked down to like a Trizac. basically essentially like a Scotch-Brite pad on a big wheel. Then from there, got into handwork. So just continuing to use like sanding pads, going higher and higher in the grit, so finer in the grit. And then once that was done, I cleaned it off, and I cleaned it with acetone. I didn't want to, if you're gonna flame it, so this is a flame finish. You can kind of tell it's a little bit purple and some cool hues in it. Did the snow on the back, so that's just like an awl, like kind of like a little nail driver you can use to just do a little punch. And then from there, it was simple. Clean it off with acetone because I don't want to have any oil or any fingerprints on it. So I made sure I cleaned it a couple times. Put it on a little stand, and then used a matte gas torch, which burns at a lot higher temperature. And from there, I just paint filled after it cooled, of course. I did use the same shaft. This is the original shaft. It's a pencil shaft, so it's got a very, very small diameter. It's actually very, very flexible, which is kind of, because it's a lighter head weight, it's one of those things where you kind of balance it out. It's the exact same as how modern putters are using like something like the stability shaft, because it's a lot stiffer. So the heavier head weight helps the shaft, the club stay stable on a miss hit. But for example, in a tiny old putter like this, you don't need that. So that's a good question. I don't like refinishing metal woods because, to be honest, it's just not worth my time. There's a lot of people that do way better jobs at it. And even if I have, on occasion, put like a sky mark on a ferrule or a driver, I just play it. It's just a golf club. You can get another one eventually. Starting your own shop, just to tinker. This is a really common question. I've written an article about this. I'll put a link. I'll post about it. If you just go to the Golf X site, look up my name or Google it, Golf X, you will find an article on essential club building tools, and it's basically everything that's in my shop. You don't even need a sanding belt. You don't necessarily, chop saw is really nice to have, but to be honest, this is kind of the ideal setup for what you need to start a build shop. A solid workbench, number one, because without a solid workbench, you can't install a vise. You need some type of work surface that you can kind of get dirty, and it doesn't have to be. It can take some abuse. It can take some wear and tear. This actually has two vices on it. It had one. I didn't want to keep switching out and putting on the shaft puller and going back and forth. It's really annoying. So with that, I installed the second vise. It's out of the way. I don't have to use this for anything else. It's dedicated. It's there all the time. And again, it's just a workbench. It's easy to use. You want a vise. This is obviously a fancy like shaft puller. There are different versions of this. There are ones that are fancier with hydraulics and all kinds of stuff like that. You don't need a grip station. They're very helpful, but you don't need one. There's easier ways to go through the process of putting grips on. One of which is this thing here, which I still use on occasion if there's things that I'm kind of I don't want to use this. I don't need to use that. And it's just, you can buy these little rubber clamps, again, from a club building supply place. You got Golf Mechanics, you got Golf Works, and just throw it in the vise. I've had this for probably 10 years. Goes in, you can clamp the shaft. You just have to be careful. And this is the other thing too. This here has an adjustable pressure gauge on it. So depending on the shaft, if I'm putting in something that has a much thinner diameter, I can actually very easily adjust this up or down. So it creates different pressure here. And you'll even notice with graphite shafts, there's actually a pretty substantial difference in the diameter, like 6 inches below the grip. So with that, I'm able to on and off some new putters. It's very easy to use. It's very functional. I've had this thing, this unit here I've had for, again, 12, 13 years. This is new. You got to replace this thing. You got to replace the catch tray every, 5 to 10 years. If it breaks, you got to replace it quicker, but I've been pretty good about keeping my tools clean and taking care of them. The one thing I will stress is if you don't pre-order like pre-cut lengths of grip tape, which I've seen people do before, it's really handy actually. The one thing to do is buy a tape dispenser. Please buy a tape dispenser. I held out on this for years. I held out on using one of these things for close to a decade. And because a lot of times I was doing my own clubs, which is one grip at a time. I was never in a rush. I was never in any sort of hurry to do my own clubs. I'd always have play a hockey game or had the radio or music on or something like that. And I wasn't didn't really care at the pace that I was building golf clubs at home. I worked in a custom shop, and we had this and another tape dispenser that did like just two, like masking tape, so one-sided masking tape. Really easy, just boom, boom, boom. But when I realized that how much faster I could be at home with one of these things, it was just totally worth it. You kind of got to, just like with a shaft puller, you know, every time you drive somewhere to drop a shaft off to get it pulled, if it's graphite, it's time out of your day. It's something that you want. Obviously, you don't want to spend the time on. This was like $500. Did I want to spend $500 on it? No, but I've definitely saved $500 in gas and my time and having someone else do it and waiting. All these different things add up. And this is from Uline. There are different ones. Again, there's a lot of different places you can get this from. A lot of my tools have been pieced together because this is my own. No one's paying me to do this stuff. I mean, I do charge people when I do work, but it's expensive to do these tools. And so because I want to make sure that I don't just waste money on something that I'm not going to use, I take the time to save up for these things. So this is a tape dispenser from Uline. It's a two-sided tape dispenser. It was rough. I think it was like $100. But again, very worth the effort and very worth the time, because it all stemmed from the fact that I had someone ask me if I could do their grips, and it was like 4 wraps of tape. I thought, oh, that's not a big deal, until I got to like the 3rd grip, and it had taken me, I don't know, quite a bit of time to go through, pull the tape off. It simplifies the process. So as far as tools, as far as getting introduced to club building, you're going to want a torch, a bench, a vise, some hook blades. This is just, you'll need epoxy, you'll need ferrules, but beyond that, maybe a drill. But check out the article on Golf Direct, because it is a good way to go through that process. A lot of this stuff gets really fancy. So I've got my little shaft dispenser, got the ferrule turning arm there on a 42-inch belt sander. I have the chop saw there, and it just allows me to make sure that when I go through the process of being careful, some more, I have the right tools to make sure. I don't use them all the time. I don't have to use them all the time. But when I'm going through the process, I want to make sure that I have it there, and it makes it a lot easier. Well, here we go. Let's see what else here. Sorry about this. I want to make sure I find the actual questions. So I asked this on Instagram as well. Sorry about the delay there. So I asked this question on Instagram, and just like the people generally have questions about, you know, what I have around the shop. Let's see what else we got here. Before we get to the Instagram stuff, I got a couple more from Golf WRX. One is the stamping video. So I did a stamping video. You can check it out in our channel, and it is I stamped where is it here? Stamped a mill grind 2 wedge with the just WRX. It is a cast wedge from everything that I'm aware of, and it's more difficult to stamp a cast wedge versus a forged wedge. Forged wedges are going to stamp a little bit easier, just inherently because of the metal, but not always the case. It comes down to the actual metal that's used. If it's a soft carbon steel, it's a soft carbon steel, whether it's cast or it's forged, and that's generally where you're going to notice the difference. A lot of times, if you're dealing with something that is very thin, or you're dealing with something that has like an unsupported face, those become a lot more difficult to actually stamp just in general. But with wedges, you don't normally have to deal with those kind of things. And there's not a huge difference. It's all about making sure that you have newer stamps, or stamps that are at least sharp, and you're using the proper tools. So it comes down to using a proper workbench. I have another one that this camera's sitting on here. You put it on top of the leg. You don't put it on top of the middle of the bench, because as you hit the middle of the bench, there is going to be flex, even if you don't really see it go, which is probably not going to. That little bit of rebound is where you can get jumpy with the stamps, and you don't want that. What I've done before is use my here, my lock machine. I'll use that base, take the machine off of it, and then it's right on the ground. But with this bench, I don't really have to worry about it, or the bench that the camera is sitting on. Then an anvil. enough to hopefully take out a Roadrunner, but usually the Coyote gets it instead. I think it's about 10, 15 pounds. I'm not sure. It's not a really big one, as you can see. Wedge sits on it quite comfortably, and then from there, you just stick the club to it. I did in the video demonstrate how to use the two-sided tape, put it on there, and then it was just the wedge head. It wasn't the full thing. There are other options as far as, I know Brian just did a video recently. It's also on the channel showing off the Ricky Johnson wedge anvil. So you can't only use it for wedges, right and left-handed, but it's still a very useful tool because you can leave the shaft in. It has some pretty powerful, like, rare earth magnets, so it holds it down. You don't have to worry about it moving. I still recommend putting some tape down just as that extra little buffer in case it does happen to slide, and just it's just a little extra safety measure. But there's not, when it comes to wedges, there's not a huge difference between forge and cast. It's more along the materials. That's the same thing with like doing irons, right? It's pretty difficult to stamp like older ping irons. You see them like the i3s and those, like just the cast stainless steel ones. Timeless stuff's generally not an issue because a lot of it's forged, but the material that's made of is quite stiff, and it's not going to take a stamp quite as well. So when you see those really cool custom like logos or names like they do with Bubba or any other ping player, on the older stuff, it was generally either milled in directly after the fact because it's not that easy to stamp or customize. Let's see, just for I had a question about persimmon wood and what's called threaded golf shafts. I haven't done a lot of them, to be honest. I wish I could help with that a lot more than I am, but I don't have the background as far as working with persimmon. I do play them. I've learned a long time ago how to do the whipping on woods, but I haven't had to do it. I learned to build golf clubs probably like past the Big Bertha era, like the original Big Bertha era and stuff like that, and into like the 975J and D and those drivers. So I didn't really learn. I knew that it was available. I knew those things were there, but I don't know exactly how those things kind of go together. Another great person to ask on that would be like Tad Moore, or reach out to Louisville Golf. I'm sure they'd offer great resources on some information on how to do that. I just don't unfortunately have the expertise or experience, which I'm more than happy and willing to admit, because I'm not the grand poobah of persimmon golf clubs. I just like to use them. So, but again, thanks for asking. I'll happily point anyone who ever asks a question that I can't answer in the right direction, because like I said, I'm not a know-it-all. Always learning all the time. So there were a lot of questions that came in on Instagram, so I'm going to go through them here as quickly or as hopefully in as detailed as I can, because I want to make sure that I go through the process of explaining things, because that's the great part about doing a live video, is the fact that I can go into long form. When I'm answering on Twitter or Instagram, unfortunately, I'm limited in characters unless I want to write a novel, and that's kind of the whole synthesis of this coming to be, was the fact that you are using those platforms, it's harder to answer in a detailed response. And when you have articles and you have video and you're able to do these things, you can explain it a lot better. And with visual representation, like this kind of stuff, it's just a lot easier. Shaft tipping. This is a great question. I was actually working on a video on this. Is not quite there yet, but we can use this as kind of the first starting point. So I'm going to get to that. First, I need a golf shaft. So I've got a golf shaft here, and this is obviously the shaft tip. What tipping means is, and this involves any shaft that has a parallel tip section on the end, have it be either 370 for either like irons, the graphite, or steel. Generally, you're going to see 370 or 355 taper. You can tip a taper shaft, but you can only tip them so much if they're going into a taper head, or else it's not going to fit. And at that point, you have to ream out the club head, but we can touch on that subject at a later date. If we're just referring to fairway woods and drivers, what tipping does is you have to think about the properties of a golf shaft. As the radius, as the outside diameter gets thicker, it gets inherently stiffer. It's just the nature of a design because of the way that as it gets bigger, it's going to get inherently stronger because of the material and because this part of the golf shaft takes a ton of load, so they need to make sure that it's nice and stiff. Anyways, so we're going to build a 45-inch driver, but we want to play a little bit stiffer. So most golf shafts have 4 inches of parallel tip section, PTS. What you do is you tip it to make it stiffer. You can't actually tip a golf shaft to get it to play up an entire flex because you haven't changed anything else in the profile. You're just adjusting the bottom portion of the golf shaft, but you can do a lot of adjusting in this part of the shaft. So for a driver, generally you're going to tip it per manufacturer's instructions 0. Now, if you want to play it a little bit stiffer, let's say the example I use all the time is, let's say you get fit into a golf shaft and you're kind of in between stiff and regular. Now, if you have a quicker tempo, maybe you're going to want to move into the stiff because it's going to offer something that is a little bit more stable under the hands, and in the mid part of the golf shaft, just more stable in general because it's a little stiffer. And with your quicker tempo, that's probably the better fit. But if you are right in between and you are someone who swings at a slower tempo, or your speed is just on the other side of getting into that stiff flex, what you can do is you can make it play kind of in between by making it stiffer in this part of the golf shaft by tipping it and leaving more of this to make it more stable at this end and as we get down to the end of the golf shaft. All you're doing is you are removing parts of the tip section. So if you have a driver shaft that has 4 inches of parallel tip, you could say tip it an inch, install it, tip it up to maybe, 2 inches. If like, that's kind of crazy, but it's probably better. If you're tipping a driver shaft 2 inches, you're probably not into the right shaft. That's a general statement, but I would like to stand by that. Now, a perfect example of kind of the extreme example of this is Gary Woodland. Gary Woodland won the US Open. Gary Woodland is known for someone who absolutely smashes driver, has a lot of club head speed, has a lot of power. And he doesn't need to hit it further. He's trying to hit more fairways and hit with more control. So what they did was they take a very stiff golf shaft already, and you tip that 2 inches at the end because it's the stiffest model that X company makes. And now they've just made it like an extra stiff play, a lot stiffer again for consistency. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily it doesn't mean that it's the absolute perfect fit, but again, Gary, as an extreme example, is not looking to hit it further. He's looking to gain more control. Even if, say, as some people always kind of note, it feels a little bit like rebar, but if you swing it as fast as Gary Woodland at like 120 miles an hour, it doesn't really matter. And that's where, he's stabilized the tip, and now he's using more of this larger section underneath his hands, so the shaft is inherently going to play more stable and hit more fairways, and you can win the US Open. It's a great question because and with irons, you get the same thing. You can tip a little bit one way or the other. You'll also see recommended tipping instructions for fairway woods. So, and the reason they do this is as fairway woods get shorter, obviously, but the heads get heavier. So to counteract the fact that they are heavier and they're playing shorter, you tip them. You have to just think of tipping as you leaving more of this side of the golf shaft, which is more stable, and moving it kind of slowly down closer to the club head and removing this part of the golf shaft to make it play more stiff. That's all it is. For a 3-wood, a lot of times it's an inch. Some manufacturers recommend 0. Depending on your club builder or your club fitter, they're going to recommend certain tipping parameters for your golf shafts that go into your heads. And if you're using, let's say, using a Fujikura shaft in your driver and using a True Temper shaft in your fairway wood, the tipping is going to be completely different. Just because shaft recommendations are going to be different, so it doesn't mean because you tip an inch in your driver, you need to tip it 1.5 inches in your 3-wood and so on, because the manufacturers are different. All those parameters are vary per OEM. So it comes down to making sure that if you are a club fitter or a club builder, that you're going through the process of understanding what each shaft does, so you can recommend those to the player. Or if you're a player who's building your own golf clubs, you want to make sure that you're not just blindly tipping something because you could ruin it. If you don't know how much parallel tip section there is, you can go to the manufacturer's website. You can always find that out, because if you start tipping past the parallel tip section, you're trying to install the golf shaft on there, head onto the shaft, and it doesn't fit. Well, There's a reason for that, and it's because at this point you potentially ruin the golf shaft, which you never want to do. Swing weight versus total weight. Swing weight is a really old method of measuring how golf clubs match. The reason they did this was to have things, feel the same for the golfer. I think it actually dates back to pre-steel shafts. I'm pretty sure on that. Swing weight scale, which I have a couple. Got one up there in the window there. I've got my shadow graph, which is behind the camera right now. It's hard to turn it around. But what it does, it measures the relative balance point, or it measures the relative mass on the club of the head on a 14-inch fulcrum from the butt of the shaft. From the butt of the golf club. There's a lot of things that can affect. There's a lot of things that can affect swing weight. It's obviously head weight is the biggest one. Shaft weight is going to affect it as well, and then you have the grip. My personal way of building golf clubs is to oftentimes not worry so much about what the grip on swing weight is, but worry about what the grip off swing weight is. Let's say I want to hit D2. Everyone usually says, okay, D2 is pretty standard. So if you want to hit D2 in your driver, or just build a D2 driver to D2. So you've got the head weight correct, you've got the shaft weight correct, and the bend or the balance point, all these different things. You've cut it to the length that it's going to be. So it's going to be cut to 45. You put it on your swing weight scale, and generally using a 50-gram grip, like a grip that weighs 50 grams, which is most standard size grips, give or take a couple grams. That driver is going to be at D2. That's kind of what it means. But if I put the driver on a swing weight scale without a grip on it, it would, because of that 50-gram mass removed, it would be roughly E2, give or take a point or two. But what if you build a driver to D2, and now all of a sudden someone wants a mid-size or an oversized grip? Something like a Lambkin oversized cord grip weighs close to 80 grams. Well, now you just put a bunch of mass. You haven't done anything else to the rest of the golf club. You just added a ton of mass under the grip. So the club itself is heavy. It's heavier by, let's say it's 80 grams. It's heavier by 30 grams, 30 grams more than the original or what a stock grip would be. Well, that's going to make the club feel on the scale a lot lighter, but the club is inherently 30 grams heavier. The total weight's gone way up. Is that good or bad? I don't know. It comes down to the player, and that's why this is so important. I know for a fact, having built and used a lot of golf clubs, that I am more sensitive to the total weight than the swing weight. I've used drivers that are into the low E's. I use drivers that are D0. But at the end of the day, they generally weigh the same. Again, give or take a little bit. And if you were to say, put on that 80-gram grip and say to yourself, well, now the swing weight's all messed up. It's really light. I need to add a bunch of weight to the head to get it back to where it was before. Doesn't mean you have to add 30 grams. That's a lot. But what you're doing is, as you add mass, the shaft is going to start to play softer. So the dynamics are starting to become very different on the golf club that you originally built, just because the grip weight has changed. This is why I don't always think, and I've used this phrase before, the swing weight is very overrated, especially when you're dealing with specs that are outside of what is considered standard or the norm club build, like an iron set that's a 37-inch 7-iron. Or just, again, because of the fact that you've now thrown this whole thing off. So if something's really long, do you really want to remove mass from the club head? Because mass helps transfer energy. The more mass that's in the club, the faster the ball, and the more energy is going to transfer to the golf ball. So if you make it really light to just counteract the fact that you made a longer golf club, are you really helping that golfer? I don't know. I haven't studied that, but I don't like to think that as I remove mass, it's really going to help me that much. And if you look at drivers, for example, something like the Ping G410, the stock shaft is a counterbalance golf shaft because to increase MOI, to help increase ball speed, help increase forgiveness, they've increased the club head weight. So generally a driver head weighs, used to be around 200 to 202 grams. Now they get up to 210 think what did I say? Sorry, 200 to 202 would be like a general like driver from a few years ago. Now you're looking at drivers that weigh 210, 211. And what they're doing is they're counterbalancing. So they've added mass here. They've added mass here. The shaft remains relatively the same, let's say 60 grams. They've increased the balance point. So it still feels like, say, even D1 or D0 or D2, but the head is actually heavier now. So this whole unit, the whole club itself as a system has been designed around that heavier club head. Now the total weight is going to be up because you've added mass on both ends of it, but because of the balance point has been changed through shifting mass inside of the golf shaft, you've left the actual swing weight, say D2, D3, D4, whatever it happens to be. It's not like it's going to immediately go to like E0 and feel very heavy. And with that, you're going to transport energy, you're going to hit the golf ball longer because you've increased the club head mass. And that's where I think for the player, it comes down to a feel thing. So some players are going to like this, some players are not going to like this. And it takes time actually hitting golf balls, actually going through and trying different shafts and grips and trying different head weights. Because if someone is using a shorter club, and this applies to juniors or just shorter players in general, have it be women, seniors, whatever. As you build lighter golf clubs and shorter golf clubs, you don't want to have them be at D2. You want them to be at the weight that's going to fit that player. So this is how you have to think of a golf club as like a total system, right? Is that if I use an iron set that is D2 or D3 or D4, and throughout the set it kind of progresses into a little bit lighter in the woods and a little bit heavier in the wedges based on just what I've learned over time fits me. Someone who is using a club that is an inch and a half shorter than me shouldn't be necessarily having something that feels the same, because now you're manipulating a lot of mass in the club head or the grip to get it to play to a swing weight, which might feel too heavy anyways. Someone's using a 40-gram golf shaft, they probably don't need something that feels that heavy from a swing weight perspective, and it should actually be a lot lower. So you pay attention more to total weight. So from iron to iron, you're looking for that still 7 to 8 to 9 to 10 grams difference all the way up through the shaft, so they feel the same all the way through. And then you check frequency, you check all the other steps of the build process to make sure you have a consistent golf club. And that leads into the next question, which is MOI. MOI is a way which most people think about like forgiveness on a putter or on a driver or on irons, whatever it happens to be. But with MOI of a golf club or MOI matching, it's been around in club building for a long time, but it has never really made its way into the mainstream of like the golf vernacular. And what it does is use a machine or use a calculation to figure out the actual feel of the golf club, the amount of energy it takes to make the golf club feel like get it started moving. It's hard to explain. It's not the easiest thing to explain, but that's kind of the gist of it. And it creates a similar feel throughout your entire set of golf clubs. Now, there's ways to measure it using an expensive machine. There's different ways you can calculate it, but a kind of a cheater's way to build an MOI match set of golf clubs is to either build a set that has 8-gram increments between club heads versus the traditional 7. Traditional is just based on a standard set. That doesn't mean a combo set. That doesn't mean shifting center of gravities. This is a very general statement. But if you do that, you can build with general, like normal half-inch increments between clubs. Now, if you want to kind of try something a little different, you can use those 8 grams or 9 grams between club heads, depending on the shaft design or club design, and you can play the clubs at, instead of half-inch in between clubs, you actually go 5/8 of an inch. So you take that little extra 1/8 of an inch off. So you find your favorite golf club, you find the swing weight, and then from there you go up and down in that 5/8 increment instead of the full inch, and you use that 8 or 7 grams depending on the way the center of gravity shifts within the golf clubs, and you can get a set that is, I call it cheater MOI matched, or what it also is progressive swing weight. You should see a half point progression in swing weight between clubs, and that in essence is a simple way, not perfect, way of MOI matching. So I hope that answers the question. I I know it's not it's a difficult topic, and it's something that can get very detailed, especially when you get into the math equations of like trying to figure out head weight, shaft weight, grip weight, length, and all these different things. So how do you fit and build for a beginner golfer? This is a really good question because we want to encourage golfers to get into the sport, and how do we make sure they find the right equipment? It's not necessarily easy, but there are simple things you can do to get someone started on the right path. And that is a simple static fitting. So you're looking at maybe someone's hand size, but you want to make sure that you're testing what that person actually prefers. If maybe it's a smaller grip, maybe it's a bigger grip. Just because someone has larger hands doesn't mean they're going to be using larger grips. Or just because someone has smaller hands doesn't mean they're going to be using smaller grips. You have to find something that feels comfortable to the player. Now, as far as the actual specs of the golf clubs, you can have them hit some golf balls or have them try and hit golf balls, but you're still going to be looking at their height, their wrist to floor, and go from there, and grip size. And then usually a larger cavity back or something to get someone started. It's not perfect, but someone's height and wrist to floor isn't necessarily going to change that much. And you want to get someone started on the right path of, just being able to have golf clubs that are going to work for them. Doesn't mean you have to go expensive. Doesn't mean you have to go brand new. You can go used. If you buy a set of golf clubs that's say a half inch over or an inch, just like kind of standard spec, then you can bend the lie offs on them a little bit. You can add extension if you want to. You can cut them down. You can use different grip sizes, and you're into a set of golf clubs for a very reasonable rate. I hate when people say that golf equipment is expensive. I understand that new golf equipment is expensive. It's like saying cars are expensive, but you can go out and buy a 5-year-old car that's going to function for a very long time still, and it costs you, pennies on the dollar versus a brand new one. You don't need to buy new to have something that's going to work for you. I've talked about it a lot. I don't need to get into it. It's a big issue that I rant about all the time. But yes, again, new golf equipment is very expensive because of the R&D, recouping costs, paying people, all like processes, materials. It's expensive. But if you're buying on the used market, someone else has already tried it. They moved on to something else, and now it's your opportunity to try something that is still very new, still packed with technology. It's just seen a few golf balls, and so it doesn't really matter too much. And then you can get the lie loss adjusted. You can change the grips, change the length. Boom, you got a set of golf clubs that have been not entirely completely custom fit, custom built from scratch, but it's the difference between buying a suit from a tailor and getting complete all your measurements done and getting totally fit up for your shoulders and your arm length and all that stuff versus buying a suit off the rack and getting the sleeves adjusted, getting the waist adjusted, getting your getting the hem on the pants adjusted, and then you're all set. Is it just as good? Probably not. Totally honest. But it's going to be get someone on the right path, get them started, and then if they enjoy it and they're progressing, then at that point in time, it becomes that player's option to upgrade. So that's the best way to fit beginners. You swing, dry fit. Oh, do I dry fit for swing weight and total weight? So it's very similar to how I mentioned the previous example. Let me show you, because I don't want to go through this whole process and not walk someone through this. So I'm just going to move the computer real quick and turn it around, and I'm going to show you how I dry fit a set of irons. There we go. This is a shadow graph swing weight scale. This is what most OEMs use still to this day as far as building a set. It has a little backlight in it. I don't know how much you're actually able to see, but this gives me swing weight points between D0 and E9, which is what most clubs are going to fit into. I have these here. This is just a couple different grips that have been cut open. Because if I want to dry fit, so I've got, not a great example, but one that I'm going to use. I've got this Nike iron here. It's a 3-iron. It's got a hybrid shaft in it because I might be testing something kind of silly out. I already know that it's close to the standard length. I believe it's actually already at the length that I was going to play it at. Now, if I throw it on the swing weight scale right now, it's off the charts. It's not giving me any information. I know I said earlier, if it comes out to like E3 or E2, then it's going to back off to D2 or D3. That's great if you have a normal traditional swing weight scale. I don't have that. At least I don't use it all the time. And so if I know that my grip that I'm going to use weighs 50 grams, I'm going to take my 50-gram grip. The club is already cut to length. And then I just dry fit a grip on the club. D2.5. D2.5 with no epoxy, no ferrule. There's no tip weight in this. I've already kind of, because I've dry fitted, I know it's there. And no tape under the grip. So if you kind of factor in the fact that you're going to have tape on there, they're going to have the ferrule on. It's not going to account for much. It should end up right around there, give or take, like, a very small percentage. And that's it. That's how you dry fit. I do this for every iron. I actually have a set of irons right here that I've gone through the process of actually doing the grips first, and then I'm going to go through the process of building them. I'm going to leave the grips on the iron shafts and do it that way because I didn't want to pull them off. And I'm doing something that I don't like doing all the time, and that is reusing a set of shafts. But I'm going to do it with this set because it's an experiment, and this is a great example because I have this old shaft lying around. I have this nice, cool set of Nikes that I refinished, or at least I stripped the back finish off, and now I'm just going to build them. That's all it takes. So I hope that explains the question. I hope that explains kind of the idea of dry swing weighting. You don't have to do it. If you've got, it's something that I like to do because it basically guarantees a swing weight within a certain kind of position. I do worry about, when I say that I don't care, I don't worry about like the swing weight, it's because it's not the main factor that I'm like considering when I build a set of irons. I'm worried about how the overall system of the golf club is working. And to use a good example, Mira heads are generally heavier because they are a Japanese product. So they weigh the heads, which almost never need tip weights, at a standard length or even slightly under length, a little bit heavier. So if a standard 7-iron from a North American centric OEM weighs 268 grams, and it comes out to D2 with a 115-gram steel shaft at standard length. If you were to use a Mira head without drilling it out and not removing mass from the club head or grinding it or something like that, then it's probably going to end up at like D5. Well, if I'm fitting a player who's a strong player into a set of Mira irons or baby blades or whatever it happens to be, and they are using a Mira head, which I know is already going to be slightly heavier, they're going to be using a Project X 6.5 or a KBSC taper or something that is on the heavier side of the weight scale, and they're going to be using just basically any grip, that whole club is going to weigh a lot because it's designed to fit someone who is a lot stronger. And I know that the likelihood of that club ending up at C7 is pretty low. It's almost not impossible, but if it's at standard length or slightly over length, the likelihood is basically zero. Now, if I do the same thing and I'm building something for a shorter player that's a 40-gram graphite shaft, I'm using lighter head weights and I'm using a lighter grip, and it's an inch under, or half inch or an inch under length of like considered standard length, so under a 37-inch 7-iron, then there's no chance that it's going to come out heavier. But that total weight, that unit, that system that you built, the golf club, is going to work better for that player because that's what they're fit into. So why would I manipulate something just to get it to a certain number that I think is correct when the fitting dictated that it's probably not the best way to do it? So that's why when I said I don't care about swing weight, it's that I think that it's an overrated thing that consumers often worry about, where it's like, it should be here, it should be here, it should be here. Whereas if the golf club that you're fit for doesn't really fit into that general range and you were fit for it, it's not something you really should worry too much about, because if it's built and you don't like it, then you can go back and you can find and adjust afterwards, which is great with adjustable drivers and things like that. So yeah, I get ranty on those kind of things. Let's see what else we have. Ooh, I said answer any questions. So have I looked into getting a simulator for the winter? I'd really like one. Anyone out there wants to help? No, yes and no. I would like one. Like you said, there's not enough clearance in the shop to hit golf balls. I could probably hit wedge shafts or wedges and short irons if I move this bench around and set up a mat and didn't have to worry about these lights that are hanging. But I can travel to where I want to hit golf balls. I have great friends who work, and there's some places close by that are less than an hour drive that I can go hit golf balls inside. It's a big expense to set up a simulator. I know some of the least expensive products are very good. There's ones that use that just track golf ball. I'm not going to promote anybody here. But you can look into them. There's some great camera systems out there. But then if you have a radar unit, like any type of launch monitor, again, I'm not going to go into brand specific names because everyone knows what they are. But if you are using one of those, you just need enough space inside of your house or indoors or a garage or whatever it is. That's something that I would like to do, is go the range or the launch monitor route, have it be a photo-based one or a radar-based one, and just set up a TV or a computer and a bench and just a mat and a net. I have enough space in my garage to do so, but again, these systems are pretty expensive. So I'd like to have one. I've looked into it. I'm still considering it, but we'll have to see what happens. Because I have friends that, and I know places where I can go and hit golf balls in the wintertime, and it's not too hard. I mean, you spend a little bit of money on a tank of gas to get somewhere and some time, but you don't have to rearrange your entire garage to set it up. So it's probably going to be the route that I go. But I've definitely looked into it, and I'd like to continue to look into it in the future, because it's something that I would really like to have, because as the wintertime, or even if it's a rainy day in summer, you can go and hit golf balls, and you can work on your golf game. Headweight difference between men's and women's golf clubs. There is a variance in especially drivers. You'll notice that, and this is very specific to something like a Ping GLE, or a club that is designed for women or players with slower swing speeds, because they're very lightweight. As I talked about earlier, the whole system is lighter. The headweights aren't usually, there's not a huge variance. There is some, like they can be, let's say 5 to 10 grams. If you think of what 5 grams means to like a 200 gram club head at 45 inches, then there's a benefit to a player to have that be lighter. But it comes down to that. As I said earlier, I do not talk all like scientific-y, nerdy, but the whole system of the golf club is generally made lighter to be able to be swung faster and swung under control. One of the biggest issues you will see with beginners, women, juniors, just in general, is the fact that if a club is too heavy, what ends up happening is, and there are great examples on tour of players that have overcome this. One would be John Daly's club is very heavy. As a junior, the club gets over the head and just goes like this, right? And you got to wing it all the way back around. Another example would be someone like Lexi Thompson, or before that, you had Paula Kramer. They have this thing in their swing where they actually, once they get through impact, they kind of shift this way, right? I'm not a biomechanics by any means. I don't have any education in that. But if you just pay attention to their history of injuries, a lot of it has to do with their back, because you're putting a ton of strain on your back by getting to that position where instead of like rotating and like resisting, you're putting a lot of pressure there. So what does that mean? Sorry. It's because when they were younger, their clubs were too heavy. So just like a junior can get to here, you also don't want a club that's too heavy pulling someone through. You want golf clubs to fit the player for their golf swing now, rather than trying to fit somebody into something that is going to work for them down the line. You see this in almost any sport where equipment is or can be more expensive, or someone is unsure about getting a growing child into something that is going to work for them. And this applies to beginners of like slower swing speeds and women anyway in general, but like for juniors just as a whole, gender neutral, is the fact that if you try and get them into a golf club that is too heavy, they're not going to have fun. It's going to be tiring, and they're not going to be able to hit the center of the golf club very often, which is, that's the whole point. You're trying to help them make the game as easy as possible. And so with that, when you get a club that is a lot lighter, then it just helps out in general. So OEMs produce clubs that are a lot lighter. And I've looked at, because I have a little 2-year-old, I've already looked at trying to put together clubs for her that are going to work for her. Now, US Kids make some great stuff. And because of that, they're pretty inexpensive, because they know like the materials they're using are not, they're high end for junior golf clubs, but they're not something that they're really worried about someone swinging at 100 miles an hour. It's not what it's designed for. So the shafts are like little tent poles, and heads are very light, and grips are nice and small. And it's just easier for them to just bring it back and get the right technique. They're not strong enough to resist it going back if it's too heavy and it just goes like this. So the idea is they just go back and through, and they can start learning to play golf and just whack a golf ball around, which is, I think, the best way to learn anyways. So the heavyweights are a lot lighter in those, but as you get into clubs that are going to fit more into like a standard length or a standard person, then what ends up happening is they're generally going to be around anywhere from a 7-iron being, say, 270 grams to 260 grams. It's a pretty big mass difference, but depending on the player, you're going to be able to adjust using the shaft, like just using head weights or tip weights, or either removing weight from the hosels, which is possible with the drill press. I think Mizuno did one of the things in their video. Another person on YouTube demonstrated their build process. So they put it into a drill press, drilled out mass from the hosel just to get head weights, which is always really cool. TaylorMade does something really neat where they have these little bullet weights that go in the bottom of the club heads. I think Callaway does as well, where there's actually a hollow port at the bottom of the bore. So to explain that, let's actually go to the whiteboard. Hopefully you can hear me. Hopefully you can hear me on the microphone. Can you hear me? All right, okay, I think I'm still good. So you have you got a club head. It's very rudimentary. You can see it there. Make the lines a little thicker. So you've got your club head. There's the hosel. Now, in the bottom of the hosel, generally it's going to bottom out here. So now you've got the bottom of the hosel on a golf club, and then when you put a shaft in, the tip weight goes up the golf shaft. That's how tip weights work. But what you'll find from some of the OEMs is they don't use tip weights. They don't use tip weights in the traditional sense because they don't want to put anything in the golf shaft, because if they're working with steel or they're working with graphite, they don't want to have to worry about having two different styles of tip weights to worry about, okay, well, this one's steel, it can go up the golf shaft. This set's graphite, we got to go find the different tip weights. That's a lot of different parts, a lot of different pieces that they have to order, and now you have two different SKUs for one golf club. And why would you want that? Because it costs more money, right? Anytime you add a part to the system, or anytime you add a part to the processing of making a golf club, then it becomes more expensive, which we're trying to avoid. So what they do is, instead, inside of the bottom of the hosel, which I will, make this golf club here, there's this little port, like this. It's right there. Hopefully you can see that. And what this little port does is it accepts a weight that is pre-designed and pre-shaped. It literally looks like the end of a bullet. And it will go into the bottom of the hosel. they glue it in, and then they can just install any golf shaft they want. They don't have to worry about it. So the heads will traditionally come in light already from the manufacturing side of things. They get to a custom order. They look what shaft needs to go in it. They look what the requested swing weight is. They look at the overall length of the golf club. And then from there, they will decide which weights go into each club head. And then from there, what they'll do is they'll just build the golf clubs. They never have to worry about what goes in that inside of that golf shaft. It also, if it means more weight, you don't have to worry about breakage. And it's one of the ways that OEMs have a huge benefit to building golf clubs, because they can order all these pieces specifically for their own product. If you want to go through that same process as a builder, you have to make those little things. And it's not easy because they all weigh different and they're different. That's why the custom tuning port on the back of a ping iron is because it allows them to fine tune for each club head weight and put it in the back of the clubs for vibration dampening, and also for adjusting swing weight based on length of the golf club and all these different things to make sure that they feel consistent, have it be total weight or swing weight, whatever it is. That's why they use those things. But you can't just go out and buy ping custom tuning ports. You can't just go buy tip weights from TaylorMade. You can create. I have built them before where you literally take lead plug, like lead wire, really thick 1/4 inch lead tube, or no, it's solid, so it's just like wire. You cut it. You don't melt it down, but you kind of push it into that little hosel port to get the weight up, and then you can drill out until you get to the exact weight that you need. It's painstaking, and you don't want to always go through that process if you're building irons, and that's why it's great when you have club heads either from a manufacturer that are already very close to spec that you can easily get to spec, or you have them perfectly picked, and then it's very easy. PXG is another one that uses this system. They have their own hosel weight port that is in the bottom of the hosel, so it doesn't affect the bore depth. And that's the other part. Speaking to bore depth, a lot of times if you're using a graphite shaft, now this is a wood shaft that I had from the previous thing that we did. It's not going to fit into that inside diameter, so you can't just put it in the bottom of the shaft, because now that we're here, we've already got it. Let's pretend this is a driver now. So you've got your hosel, or it's a graphite shafted golf club, and you can't get a tip weight up the shaft, and you don't have the right weight for this. Well, how do you achieve the proper head weight without using lead tape? Lead tape is obviously the last resort as far as making something that's going to work, because I don't like working with. It's not permanent. It's permanent because it's stuck there, but it's not a permanent solution. A lot of times you can use it in fittings, you can use it in testing, but it's not something that I like to use all the time just because it can get all over the place, it falls off and whatever. So you can't just throw a tip weight in, because now you've decreased the hosel bore depth. And once you decrease the hosel bore depth, then what ends up happening is you change the flex profile of the golf shaft. So the further that the shaft is from the bottom bore to ground measurement, these are all big terms I'm using. Bottom bore to ground measurement is the measurement from the bottom of the hosel to where it would imaginarily hit the bottom of the golf club. So if that number is consistent throughout a set of irons, then it's easier to go through the process of figuring out how those shafts are going to react in a golf club. But as soon as you start getting adjustable ones that are all over the place in iron, so one hosel bore depth is 1 inch, one's 1.5 inches, one's 1.25 inches, well, then either you have to tip the golf shaft, so it is possible, or if you didn't take that into account, well, now you've essentially tipped one shaft 1 inch, you've tipped one shaft 1/2 inch, you've tipped one shaft 1/4 inch without actually doing it, and now you've got the problem of everything doesn't play to flex. I hope I actually explained that properly. I know it wasn't, it was kind of off the cuff there, but that is where hosel depth can create a factor, and why different tip weights can be used in different clubs. I'm going to see if there's any more questions out there. I'm going to check out the live page here. Let me check it out. All right. And questions after the fact, remember, if you like this, use the comment section below, because what this allows me to do is take the time to go back, answer questions in the comment section, or maybe further explain things. It also helps with doing videos in the future, where if there's something that was asked and maybe I didn't explain it to where you understood it, or I didn't go through the process explaining it as in depth as you would like, I can do a separate video. It's easy. Set up a camera, set up the whiteboard, maybe set some tools up, and I can go through that process. It doesn't take a lot of time. Just make sure that I actually get it up and answer the question properly. So again, the whole goal is always to make sure that we are able and we are trying to educate you as the golfer, because the more you know, the more you understand about your golf clubs and your equipment, the better you can either learn to, figure out what line angle you need, or figure out what grip size you need, or ask the question of should the shaft be tipped if you're in a fitting. I'm not asking you to go out there and just question your fitters like because they're lying to you or something like that. They're not. Every fitter that I've ever worked with, their goal is always 100% to help the golfer and help the golfer find equipment that's going to work best for their golf game. But as a consumer, you still want to be able to ask those questions. You want to make sure that you understand what's going in your golf bag. So if you go to a different fitter, or you need to fix something, or you're looking for a replacement part or anything like that on your own, you know what to look for. Because at the end of the day, all you're really doing is you're gluing a shaft into a club head and putting a grip on it. You can get into some very extreme details as far as how many wraps of tape, your line angle, your total weight, adjusting swing weight, all these other little aspects of what goes into building a golf club. But at the end of the day, I'm just gluing a golf shaft into a club head and making it work. But it's the process leading up to that point that I am very focused on, because each component and every detail of each component factors into how that golf club is going to work for myself or for you. So again, if you like the video, please use the comment section below to give any feedback you want. If you have questions, use the comment section. I'm going to go through and answer as many as I can. Also give ideas for future videos. And if you like what we do here at Golf WX, remember we have a huge amount of podcasts. Basically, a new podcast goes out every week on our Golf WX channel, including my own On Spec, which generally dives into club building anyways on Mondays. And we're always launching articles on the site. You can discuss these things with other golfers on golfwx.com. We have the forums. We have articles that go up. We have technical articles, some people from all over the industry, industry experts. We do live chats. We do all kinds of different things because we want to engage you as the golfer and help educate you and help you make sure that you pick the right 14 tools, or maybe less than 14 tools that go in your golf bag. So as always, thanks for watching.